From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Well, as always, a week isn't just a week. It's in the times we live. A week is now a month, right? Orange is the new black. 50's the new 40. Yeah, a week is the new month. It just, so much happens. See how much we can get to here. First of all, Mark Robinson, Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, running for governor. He's about at least 10 points behind in the polls. I don't think he has much of a chance. You may have heard the news this week that he was already just a complete nut job, saying just horrible racist things and misogynistic, sexist things, that women shouldn't vote, and Hitler wasn't such a bad guy, and maybe slavery wasn't so bad, and he was already on record just being a horrible person. But it got even worse for him when it was uncovered, like 10-year-old online posts, the comment section of a porn site, where he said, "I'm a black Nazi." He was really very much into transgender sex. That was his kink, which, we don't slut shame around here. Whatever you'd like is fine with me. But he's very outspoken as an anti-trans politician, so that's why that matters. So it goes on and on. Just, he said he wished slavery could come back, and if it did, he'd certainly buy a few or something like that. Just the worst. And in the very worst sin of all, which I'm surprised no one else has mentioned, but for my money, the worst thing he did was he had it all on this online comment thing in the Comic Sans font. You just don't do that. And I don't know if that was the default font of the comment section on this particular porn site, or if he chose that, but it was Comic Sans, and somebody has to take responsibility for that. All right, so there you go. There's that. Stop the steal. And in this case, I'm talking about stealing the franchise, stealing the right to vote. The Republican Party is just working overtime. All I can tell you is, wherever you live, just do not take any chances. Double and triple check your voter registration. Make sure everything is good to go. If you have an opportunity to vote early, especially voting early in person, do it. Because if somehow they try to play games with you and tell you somehow, oh, well, you're not here on our list, or you spelled your maiden name wrong on an application, on a registration from 16 years ago. They're just trying to come up with anything at all to purge people from the rolls. And it's just all over the place. So whatever state you live in, double and triple check your registration. Vote early in case they try to play games with you. That gives you a chance to, fix it. Don't ever walk away from a voting poll without voting. If they're giving you trouble, you demand a provisional ballot. Yeah, it's bad. Every state's got something going on. Georgia, of course, got the biggest headlines. Their election board, the full MAGA, well, not full MAGA, but they got the 3 out of 5. They got majority. So they're voting in all these new rules. One of them that got a lot of press was they're demanding a hand count, which pretty much just guarantees that there'll be a delay in the certification. And what they're really after here is they just want to gum up the works. The strategy that they've all sort of colluded together is they want states to be so gummed up with problems of their own making that, we can't certify in time. Well, okay, I guess we don't count. Or this is January 6th, 2021, redo. They want it to work this time. They want to withhold certification of state electors. They're already putting together slates of fake electors, just like they did last time. They want to throw up their hands and say, "Oh, well, it's just I think there might be fraud here." So they're setting it up ahead of time to throw this thing to the House of Representatives to prevent any candidate from getting 270. That's the amount you need. That's the amount of electoral votes you need to win the election. So if neither candidate gets 270, Well, then, the House of Representatives, boom, there you go. Republicans have a majority, and there's your fix. So it's the Democratic Party has, let me see, who they got? I guess it was Georgia. Yeah, they got Georgia in court. And so, yeah, a lot of this is running through the courts as we speak. What else made the news? Arizona tried to add at the last minute citizenship, proof of citizenship, which, thank goodness, the Arizona State Supreme Court put the kibosh on that. But that's certainly not dead. It'll come up again in the next election cycle, I'm sure. I imagine other states are probably doing the same thing. I don't have those stories in front of me. But that was going to be big. I was curious as to what, I don't have those notes in front of me. How do you prove your citizenship? If you had to prove your citizenship, could you do it? Well, it turns out the easiest way is a birth certificate. And then there are other ways, a passport, or there were a few other ways, but I wish I had that. Where'd that go? Where's that note? Darn it. Anyway, what I recall about this is that none of them were something that everybody just automatically has. Maybe a military discharge papers, or, like I said, a passport. We're not all world travelers. And the easiest thing was a birth certificate. But the problem with that is a pretty good percentage. It's a small percentage, but it's like 10% or more of the population don't have birth certificates. And the older you are, rural residents, people who are poor, are less likely to still have their birth certificate in the files. Do you have your birth certificate? If you needed to find it in a hurry, could you? Would you have to go over to another state, halfway across the country where you were born, and sort of track it down? I mean, could you do that? People of ethnic and religious minorities, they're less likely to have birth certificates. Anyway, the point is, the Republicans are doing everything they can to rig this thing ahead of time. Hey, there was a very good segment. I always recommend that you listen to Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. It's on daily, of course, and it's easy to find. Anyway, I always recommend it, but a special recommendation of today. I'm recording this Wednesday evening, so earlier today, Wednesday, September 25th. A wonderful interview with Dr. Jill Stein, Green Party candidate for president, and her vice presidential running mate, Butch Ware. He's a historian, professor of history. I'd never heard him speak before, and it was really, really very impressive. And it just, it reminds you again, as you and I have talked about, if it's such an easy thing to imagine. Just imagine Jill Stein on a debate stage with Kamala Harris and the Orange Menace. I mean, it would be like that scene in the Producers, that shot of the audience when everybody is just slack-jawed. Their jaws are just on the floor. It's like they can't believe what they're seeing. I think that would be the reaction of the entire nation. If a Green Party, if someone like Jill Stein and this Butch Ware, like I said, I've never heard this guy before, very impressive. If they were to get on a stage, if Butch Ware were to get on a stage with Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, the entire nation would be just shocked at the difference. And if it were to actually happen, they'd be probably in the lead the next day in the polls. I mean, and that's of course why it doesn't happen, because the Democrats and the Republicans collude. It's just never going to happen. They just won't let it happen. I don't have to go over old ground. The arguments are very clear, and I've made them before. And it goes something like this. If you're not in a swing state, and make sure, just, don't take any chances. If the polls are showing a good, solid double-digit lead, go ahead. Absolutely, you can vote for Jill Stein. And you really should, and you should make a statement. And all the down-ballot stuff, I think they've got what did I hear, 1,500 or so office holders around the country in various positions, state and local. So yeah, the Green Party, vote up and down the ballot, and if your candidate or the other candidate has a safe double-digit lead, go ahead. Your vote doesn't count in the presidential election anyway. It just doesn't count, because there's no way you're going to crack that into that 10% plus difference. So if you're in one of those states, vote your heart. And if that's Jill Stein, fantastic. If you're below 10%, and especially if you're down in the 2, 3, 4, 5%, well, then you can't take a chance. You have to vote for the candidate that will most likely beat the Orange Menace. This is just basic math here. This is reality. Now, I probably agree with Jill Stein on 90% of what she says, very strongly, as a matter of fact. She and I are a little different on Ukraine. In fact, we're a lot different on Ukraine. And we're different on the argument I just made. I do see the value in voting against the Orange Menace, which is exactly what the opposite side of the spectrum is doing. And in this case, the opposite side of the spectrum for me is Dick Cheney. I don't know how more opposite you could get. But the one thing we share is, if you want to stop the Orange Menace, you have to endorse and vote for his opponent. As much as I'd love to vote for Jill Stein, I live in Wisconsin, so I would be one of those voters. So yeah, I agree with her on everything enthusiastically. I really would love for her to be president of the United States. We disagree on Ukraine. It's a pretty big disagreement, and that would be a problem for me. And again, this sort of the mathematical equation of what we need to do. Now, that's not to say that, the whole enemy of my enemy thing philosophy, which is what I'm basically adhering to here, I admit it's problematic. It creates sort of a cognitive dissonance or even kind of an intellectual dishonesty. I mean, for example, okay, the Republicans, sometimes their criticisms are true. But the whole enemy of my enemy thing has to rear its ugly head, and I can't really admit that. Kamala Harris does sort of talk in word salads. She does sort of flip-flop, or she has. She's not an ideological person. I don't think her biggest fans in the world would say that. She was perfectly willing to tack to the left in the 2020 primary season, and she's perfectly willing now to tack to the center for the general election. But this is what politicians have always done, except for, my guy who, you're sick of hearing about him, but, Bernie. Bernie's like Jill Stein. I agree with him about a lot of things. I disagree about a few things. But what I admire is Bernie doesn't tack one way or another, depending on who he's talking to or which election he wants to win. No, he's always authentic, always 100% authentic. He tells you exactly what he thinks. He talks in detail. He also talks with passion. He talks ideologically. And I guess that just doesn't work for some people. I don't know. It works for me. What was I saying? Yeah, the example of Kamala Harris, some of the criticism from the right is actually true, but I'm not supposed to admit that because enemy of my enemy. I don't know. See, but the thing about Harris, I also have hope. When she first ascended to the candidacy, we did a whole episode about, I do have hope for her. One of the reasons is what we just talked about. She's malleable. I think she's kind of like Joe Biden in that sense, which we've also talked about. She can be pushed and pulled right and left depending on, what works. So we can work with her. I do have some hope. But anyway, right now I'm not talking about her or any other sort of normal candidate. They do what they do. Right now I'm talking about us. Let's get it back to us. Specifically, those of us who share the center and the left. Okay? The coalition against the crazies. But, we on the left, it's like we have to pretend, or we have to self-censor, or even worse, we have to delude ourselves into not believing our own lying eyes, right? When we see things and hear things that Kamala Harris does or says, and we just cringe. We go, well, that's not us. Oh, but we can't say anything. All politicians are kind of weird in a way, right? They're all flawed. They're certainly dishonest. Or at least, they're hedging their bets like we were just talking about with Harris and basically every other candidate in history except for Bernie and maybe a handful of others who I can't name right now. But they're all sort of dishonest in that way. Now, just a side note, we're not talking about the Orange Menace, who is a pathological liar and a nut job. But Yeah, we have to delude ourselves. We have to hero worship, we have to fetishize and hero worship. Harris working at McDonald's is like Lincoln splitting rails. Her mother is this iconic sort of avatar stereotype of a hardworking single mother. We have to mythologize. Why do we have to do it? It's so annoying. We love to elect working class candidates, but of course only after they become millionaires. I mean, Kamala Harris is worth like $8 million, right? She lives in a $5 million house. $8 million bucks. That puts her in the top. I looked it up. That puts her in the top 0.1% with a couple of million to spare. 8 million bucks puts you in the top 0.1%. Yeah, we love working class candidates, but only after they've made their millions. I don't know. Again, it's not about her. It's about us. Why do we have to create the myths in our heads? Why? And a myth is a whisper away from a lie, right? Lies in our heads. And, well, speaking of lies, okay, let's bring us back to the Orange Menace for a bit. I need to talk about how the media is still screwing up. After 10 years, they haven't figured out how to cover this guy. Let me say very clearly here. Every time the media puts the Orange Menace and Kamala Harris side by side, whether in photos, like side-by-side photos, which you see all the time, or a headline, the two candidates campaign in swing states today, or in a teaser for some upcoming program, the candidates, Harris and Trump, what will they do today, blah, blah, blah. Or a news story or any analysis. Anytime there's a side-by-side where they put them right next to each other, talk about them in the same terms, the pictures, they go out of their way to sort of make the pictures look equally serious or sane. Every time you see that or hear that, every time you see a side-by-side, it's a colossal lie. It's a colossal lie, because there is no way you can put these two human beings together side by side and talk about them as though they're somehow comparable. This is not even apples and oranges. This is apples and mudslides. I mean, they're just not anywhere in the same world. And it's every single damn day, every single hour, every single network, every single platform is doing this. Frontline, PBS Frontline, which I love, they did it again. Just last night I saw it. It premiered and it's available now, and I recommend it. The Choice 2024. They do this every 4 years. They do like a side-by-side biography of the two major candidates. Now, to their credit, they didn't try to manufacture a false equivalence. I've seen many of these. Like I said, they do it every 4 years. And they'll do like a 10-minute or a 5-minute, I don't know, something, 5, 7, 8-minute segment on one of the candidates' early life. And then they'll go to another 5, 6, 7-minute segment on the other one. And then they'll go just sort of ping pong back and forth through the years, each one of the candidates. Now, to PBS's credit, they didn't try to create any false equivalencies. They played it very honestly. Kamala Harris seems to be a very normal person and a very good person in many ways. And, I've never found any reason to dislike her vehemently. There are things I disagree with, of course, and we've talked about that a lot. But when they portrayed the Orange Menace, as they have in other documentaries, he's just a complete nut job. And he, from the very beginning, you almost feel sorry for the guy. His father was a sociopath, and he raised a sociopath. And yeah, it's all about this crazy life that he's had, and all about his grifting and his dishonesty and his meanness and his cruelness and his sort of love of division and hate. And so there's no false equivalence. So good for them. But still, just the very format and, the cover page, the graphic, the two of them side by side. Still, just looking at that picture is a lie. It's an absolute lie. And it does great damage because we know damn well that a good number of us have no idea what's going on. We don't watch the news. We don't read the news. We don't watch these documentaries. But these pictures pop up in our social feed or wherever. They're out there. They're in the zeitgeist. They're in the universe. They get in front of our eyeballs. And every time you see a side-by-side that equates these two as somehow equal human beings, gives a very strong message. But they're not equal human beings. One is a perfectly normal politician who sometimes fudges things and is mostly appears to be a pretty decent person. And the other one is a pathological liar, crime boss, convicted rapist, guilty of defamation, guilty of fraud. He's a felon. And that's how, if I were in charge of a media organization, I would never, ever put them side by side. I wouldn't put their pictures side by side. If we do stories about the Orange Menace, which you have to do, you have to cover the guy, but I would put them completely separate. I would talk about Kamala Harris and where she is and what she's talking about and, whatever the news is with her. And then a whole entirely different segment may be separated by other stories. Then I might do a story about him. But when you cover the Orange Menace, you got to cover him like he's a goddamn natural disaster. Cover him like you'd cover a hurricane or an earthquake that's killing people. That's the way you got to handle this guy. Yeah, that's how I do it. He's a natural disaster that needs to be stopped. And I don't give a damn about what you call objectivity. There's no objectivity when a guy is a convicted felon and rapist trying to implement Project 2025, which is so much worse than you think it is. If you get a chance, episode 80 just dropped last week or earlier this week of Charles Purcell Presents, and we did a whole show on Project 2025. And if you can go back and listen to that, I recommend it. And the more you know about Project 2025, the worse it is. I spent quite a lot of time with it, and it's just every page, it's a page turner, baby. And every page is more frightening than the last. So, yeah. And then the media keeps creating this weird sort of, it's a close race, undecided voters, and as though they have nothing to do with the fact that they created that. They created it. It's like this vicious cycle. They pretend that it's an equal race between equal people, and then when somehow out of that is created this national idea that they actually are two normal human beings, they're somehow comparable, so then it's close, so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like this vicious cycle. They create it and then they cover it. Close race, polarized electorate. It's become this permanent condition. It's a self-fulfilling narrative. I wouldn't call it a conspiracy, but it's a natural conspiracy. In other words, all of their motivation, and basically you can answer that with one word, money. It's a profit-driven media. Every decision they make has to be for their bottom line. Let's get more eyeballs. Oh, this is such an old story, and we've talked about it so many times. I'm sure you're sick of it. But yeah, everything just naturally conspires to create this polarized nation, which we're not. I'll shout this till the day I die if I have to. We are not polarized. Simple majorities, large majorities, super majorities, sometimes approaching unanimity on all the big issues. All of them. Gun control, health care for all, abortion, whatever. Ask any question, take away the party labels. We agree on most everything. 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%, up in the 90s especially, on some of these gun control issues. So I'm so tired of this polarized. We're not. The only polarization is created by the two parties and the media. It's a big lie. It's all a lie. Take away the profit incentive, and the news would look entirely different. We would all know where we agree. Like I said before, if you took away the profit incentive and alternative parties like the Green Party had an equal voice, it's like we live in freaking North Korea where they control the media. They have no idea what the truth is. Well, how is that different than 98% of Americans having no idea what Jill Stein is about, what the Green Party is about, what their proposals are, how they see the world, how they see the fixes, what they would do, what are their solutions, what are their programs. Find me one person on your block who can tell you one single solitary thing about the Green Party. I mean, the story, without the profit incentive, the story would be how the government is unresponsive to what Americans agree on and what we want. The little panel of talking heads there would be analyzing why the hell that is. And instead of debating within this very, very tightly controlled, limited spectrum. And bring this back to our current election here. Without the profit incentive, how do you suppose the Orange Menace would be covered? Just the way I said, he'd be covered as an impending disaster. Like when a hurricane is coming, the news people aren't saying, well, the hurricane may have some valid points here. No! His cruelty, his racism, his misogyny, his dishonesty, his criminality, his blatant neo-Nazi style fascism would not be glossed over. Just this week he talked about jailing critics of the Supreme Court. They should be in jail. Just add to the list of all the people who should either be in jail or literally executed. He would be objectively covered as an impending disaster, to be avoided at all costs. His followers would be covered in the news as victims of a cult, like they're victims of a pandemic. A not-for-profit news media would tell us the truth. Greens and socialists on the issues line up with what Americans want. On the issues. Again, not red or blue, not party affiliation, not labels, not conservative, not liberal, no. Just on the issues. Line up, look at the issues of what Americans want, put it right next to what the Greens and socialists propose, and they will line up perfectly. We would learn that the Dems have an organized army of lawyers to keep the Greens off of ballots, that the Republicans and the Democrats collude to keep them out of debates, that corporate interests keep non-corporate parties out of the news. They minimize, they silence their voices because, of course, these alternative Greens, socialists, they actively challenge the corporate status quo. So you're never going to find them. You're never going to find them on corporate media. Even the so-called left, which is a joke, like MSNBC is a great example. Their criticisms, their analysis of MAGA, I find to be quite accurate. But again, enemy of my enemy. We share that enemy. Okay, so I find them to be quite reliable on that score. But as far as now bringing in any alternatives other than the establishment Democratic Party, they're never going to do it because they are a corporate media entity. So you're never going to see them there. All right. Well, I got lots more to talk about, but we're not going to get to it today. There's always more than we can get to each week, but there you go. Let's call it a day. Remind you that this episode can be heard wherever you find your podcasts or at the website charlespurcell.com. And on the radio, our flagship terrestrial station is River West Radio, riverwestradio.com. Follow me on Facebook. Contact me, charlespurcell@gmail.com. And thanks to Peter Donalds, who wrote and performed the theme song. There it is. All right. I love you.